Wyoming Territory, August 1878. The sun was high and merciless when the wagon wheel cracked on the edge of the canyon trail and the outlaws left her there bleeding, pregnant, and alone. Gwenna Jameson had not screamed when they took her wedding ring or when they pushed her from the wagon. She had not begged when they called her a burden and rode off with the stolen horses and every scrap of supplies. But now, sitting in the dirt, hand pressed to the side of her swollen belly, she could not hold back the tears. She was 8 months along. Her throat was dust and her feet were cut from the rocky ground. The baby kicked hard, almost angrily, and she whispered, "I know, little one. I know. I'm trying." The wind blew dry across the open stretch of land. Sagebrush and silence. Gwenna leaned against a boulder, her breath coming in short bursts. It had been hours since the men rode away, men she had trusted, men who had promised her safety. She had married one of them, Clay Mercer, only 3 months ago. The baby was not his. He knew that. She had been desperate when she agreed to go with them west toward Oregon. She had wanted a future. A family. Instead, they had seen her as nothing more than a mouth to feed. A crunch of hooves broke the quiet. Gwenna reached for the small knife tucked inside her boot, her hand shaking. The sun glared so bright she could not make out the figure on horseback until he was nearly on top of her. A tall rider, slouched in the saddle, dust-covered from the trail. He stopped 10 paces away, boots hitting the ground slow and careful. His voice came low. "You hurt." "I do not know you," Gwenna said, her fingers white-knuckled around the knife. "You do not need to," he said, hands raised. "But I saw blood on the trail. And wagon tracks. Thought someone might need help." Gwenna looked him over. He was lean, sun-browned, maybe 30, with a long rifle strapped to his back and a worn hat shading sharp eyes. He did not move closer. "My name is Zeke Talcott," he said. "I do not want to take anything from you." Gwenna blinked against the sun and the pain. "They left me," she said. "Took the wagon. She stopped, her voice breaking. "I am going to have this baby soon." Zeke's jaw tightened. He took a slow step forward. "Let me help." She hesitated. The wind tugged her dark hair across her face, and she could feel the heat rising fast now. Her lips were dry, her limbs heavy. "I do not have a choice, do I?" she whispered. "No, ma'am," he said gently. "You do not." He got water to her first. His horse was a buckskin gelding named Flint, and from his saddlebags he pulled a canteen and a blanket. Gwenna drank until she coughed, then leaned back, eyes fluttering shut. Zeke watched her carefully. "You got a name?" She whispered it. "Gwenna." "All right, Gwenna," he said. "I am going to get you out of here." He carried her. She was light, too light, and he could feel the tremble in her muscles. He lifted her up onto his horse, climbed behind her with the blanket wrapped around them both, and rode slow westward toward the tiny homestead he had built 2 years ago. He did not talk much, and she was too tired to ask questions. But she noticed how steady his hands were, how he made sure she never tipped too far in the saddle. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk was crawling across the fields and the mountains cast long shadows. Zeke's cabin was small but clean. He had a corral, a pump, and a smokehouse. No one else around for miles. He laid her down inside on his bed. She did not argue. He kept a fire going through the night, brought her broth, wiped her face when sweat trickled down her cheeks. "You live out here alone?" she asked once, her voice rough from sleep. "I do," he said. "Had a brother. Died in the war. Parents are gone. Just me now." She looked at him for a long moment. "You were kind." He shook his head. "Just doing what is right." But she saw it, how he watched her gently, how he checked the baby's movement, how he brought her water without her asking. He slept in a chair by the door that night, rifle across his lap. The baby came 2 days later. It started with sharp pain just after dawn. Gwenna cried out and Zeke was at her side in an instant. She clutched his hand until her knuckles turned white. "I cannot," she gasped. "Yes, you can," he said. "You are strong." "I am scared." "I will not leave you," he said firmly. Not for a second. It was a long labor. Nearly 12 hours. Gwenna screamed into the pillow, her back arching, her body trembling. Zeke had boiled water, laid out clean sheets, and brought in a woman he knew from a nearby ranch, an older widow named Mrs. Kettering, who had helped birth more than a few children in her day. By the time the child came, Gwenna was crying from exhaustion. "It is a boy," Mrs. Kettering said, her voice warm, holding up the small, red-faced infant. Gwenna's arms shook as she took him. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, my sweet boy." Zeke stood nearby, hat in his hands, not speaking. But Gwenna looked up at him. "I want to call him Waylon," she said. "You saved us. I want you to know you were part of this." Zeke blinked hard. "I did not do much. You did everything," she said. Waylon slept against her chest that night, and Zeke sat in the corner, watching the fire crackle low. The silence was soft now, not empty. He had not expected this, a woman and a child in his cabin. But something in him had shifted. Something deep and warm. In the morning, Gwenna looked at him with tired eyes. "Why did you stop for me?" she asked quietly. Zeke looked down at his hands. "I do not know. But I am glad I did." She smiled, slow and real. "Me too." He made her tea, and when she reached out and touched his hand as he passed it to her, something clicked into place, quiet, sure, and already growing. The whisper of autumn had started to thread through the air, cool in the mornings, dry as bone by afternoon. Zeke had taken to rising before the sun, splitting wood while the sky was still pink and the shadows long. Inside the cabin, Gwenna moved slower now, the ache in her hips laced with the wear of sleepless nights. Waylon, barely 3 weeks old, had a cry like a saw blade and a grip that wrapped around his mother's finger like he meant to never let go. Gwenna stood by the wash basin, hair braided down her back, the boy tucked against her chest in a sling she'd sewn from a length of muslin Zeke had found in his mother's old trunk. He came in with an armful of kindling, boots scuffing the floor, and she noticed his shirt was still damp from the well. "You work too hard," she said softly. He looked over, brow damp, and set the wood near the hearth. "Not much room for idling out here." She ran a cloth along the rim of the basin. "You could have sent me east. Put me on a stage to Kansas City. You didn't." Zeke straightened, brushing bark from his sleeve. "You didn't ask me to. I didn't know I had the right. You do now." Waylon stirred, making a small, mewling sound. Gwenna hushed him with a gentle sway. She hadn't spoken much of the men who'd left her, not since the first night, but scars didn't need to be spoken of to be felt. She could hear them in the way she flinched at sudden movement, the way she kept her boots close to the bed. Zeke didn't press. He never had. That afternoon, she watched him from the doorway as he dug a new post hole for fencing. His shirt hung loose, sleeves rolled, and his movements were slow but deliberate. She had begun to memorize the rhythm of his days, how he whistled low when he worked with the horses, how he wiped his hands on his trousers before every meal without seeming to notice. When he returned to the cabin, she was mending a tear in one of his flannel shirts. Her needle moved steady through the fabric. "You didn't need to do that," he said as he hung his hat. "I wanted to." He stood for a long moment, then crossed to the table and poured water into the tin cup. "I never thought I'd have company here. Not for more than a day or two." Gwenna didn't lift her eyes. "Do you want us gone?" "No," he said it low, almost too quick. "No, I don't." She set the shirt down. "Then tell me what you do want." Zeke took a seat across from her, folding his hands. "I want to build a better fence. One that'll hold through the winter. I want to put in a second chimney flue so the back room stays warm when the wind shifts. I want to plant late barley come spring." She waited. "And?" He looked at her then, really looked like he was setting eyes on something that had been right in front of him all along. "I want you to stay." Waylon stirred again, soft and restless, and Gwenna rose to tend him. She didn't answer right away. Her hand cupped the back of her son's head, rocking gently. "You'd take on another man's child," she said finally. "You'd raise him like your own." Zeke leaned forward, his voice steady. "That boy's got your eyes. That makes him worth the world." She blinked hard. "You don't even know what I've done." "I don't need to." She turned then, slow and deliberate, and crossed the room to him. Her hand touched his, fingers rough from the fence wire, and she let them rest there. "I want a life where I'm not always looking over my shoulder." "You've got it," Zeke said. "If you want it." Her voice shook. "I do." He stood, and they stayed there in the quiet cabin, the child between them, the sun stretching long through the windows. No vows were spoken. None were needed. What passed between them was older than words. It lived in the touch of hand to hand, the weight of trust carried without demand. That night, Gwenna lit a lantern and hung it by the window. A small thing, but it glowed warm across the table where Zeke carved a new cradle board from pine. Waylon slept in the corner, and the sound of the blade running across wood was soft and certain. "You're carving it with care," Gwenna said. "I want him to have what lasts." She crossed to him and laid her hand lightly on his shoulder. "So do I." And in that small cabin on the edge of nowhere, with the wind quiet against the eaves and the fire burning low, they began what neither of them had expected, a life not borrowed nor bargained, but built one quiet moment at a time. The first snow came sudden, early, bitter, and heavy. Zeke had been mending the barn roof when the wind turned sharp and mean, cutting through his coat like wet knives. By dusk, the fields were white and the trees bowed under it, their limbs creaking with the weight. Inside, the air held the scent of boiled oats and wood smoke. Gwenna sat cross-legged by the hearth, sewing a lining into one of Waylon's winter wraps. The child lay swaddled in a basket of dried grass and flannel, his limbs twitching in sleep. When Zeke stepped inside, covered in snow and shaking out his coat, she looked up with a quiet kind of concern. "You'll catch your death climbing around that roof in this storm." He set his gloves on the stove rail. "Wouldn't be the first time I've done something foolish to keep the cold out." She threaded her needle again, not smiling. "You ever wintered this far north?" "No. Closest I came was Colorado Territory. Got snowed in for 3 weeks once." She nodded, stitching slow and even. "We'll need more preserves. There's still apples in the root cellar, but not enough fat put up. Salt pork's low. I butchered the sow this morning. Hung the meat in the smokehouse." Gwenna looked at him then, her fingers stilling. "You did that before breakfast." Zeke poured water into the basin and washed without answering. His hands were red from the cold, raw at the knuckles. "I'm not used to someone doing things before I ask," she said finally. "Not even sure I know what to call that." He dried his hands and crossed to the fire. "You don't have to call it anything. It's just what we do now." Waylon shifted in sleep, letting out a soft breath. Gwenna bent to touch his cheek, then sat back again. "Do you think they'll come looking for me?" Her voice was low, but steady. Zeke didn't rush his answer. "They might, but they won't find this place easy. They know I had nothing. That makes me forgettable." She turned the wrap in her lap, smoothing the seam down. "Still, I think about it." Zeke leaned against the wall. "You want me to take precautions? I will. I want you to teach me how to shoot." He studied her face. "You ever handled a rifle?" "My father had an old percussion musket. I used to shoot squirrels off the roof line when he was drunk." Zeke's expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders eased. "I'll take you out once the wind settles. Got a Henry .4440 you can learn on. You trust me with that?" "I trust you with my life. Doesn't seem much harder to trust you with a rifle." The fire cracked, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, snow blew sideways across the window pane. Gwenna folded the wrap and set it aside, then stood and crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, arms folded over her chest. "I'm not fragile," she said. "I never thought you were. I've had to survive men like Clay Mercer. And worse." "I know." She rested her hand on the edge of the table, fingers curled around the wood grain. "But survival's not the same as living." Zeke moved closer, slow and sure. "You know what I think?" She tilted her head. "I think you're the bravest person I've ever met. And I think this cabin's more a home with you in it than it ever was before." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. "I want something good to last." "So do I." He touched her wrist, just lightly. She didn't pull back. "I can't promise nothing'll ever go wrong again," he said. "But I can promise I'll be here. Every damn day." She nodded once. "All right." That night, he took the cot near the stove and gave her the bed again. She didn't argue. But before she blew out the lamp, she stood beside him a moment longer than usual, her gaze steady. "If the snow gets any worse," she said, "I'll want you close. I'm not going anywhere." The lamp went dark, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It held warmth and the sound of wind against the eaves and the steady breathing of a child dreaming in his sleep. They had nothing extravagant. No silver, no silks. But they had warmth. They had fire. And for the first time in a long while, they had peace. The snow held for nearly a week. By the time it thinned, the creek behind the ridge had frozen solid and Zeke's mare had trouble finding grass under the crust. He bundled extra hay from the loft each morning, shoulders stiff from the cold, and Gwenna met him at the door with boiled coffee in a tin cup, her fingers pink from the wash water. They moved easily now, the space between them filled with quiet tasks and small glances that lingered a little longer each day. Waylon had begun to follow movement with his eyes. Gwenna would laugh under her breath when he reached toward the slanted light on the cabin wall, his fist opening and closing like he meant to catch it. Zeke carved him a rattle out of scrap maple. When he handed it over, Gwenna turned it in her hands first, tracing the smooth grain with her thumb. "You were meant to build things," she said. Zeke shrugged. "I just wanted him to have something of mine. He will. Every day he sees you." She didn't say more, didn't need to. The way she looked at him now said enough. It was different than it had been in those first days, less guarded. There was a steadiness to it, like something she was letting herself believe in. Finally. That afternoon, Zeke saddled the mare and led her wide around the north slope where the wind had scoured the snow thin. Gwenna waited by the barn, rifle slung over her shoulder, braid tucked under her scarf. She adjusted the strap, her jaw set. "You sure you want to do this today?" he asked. "Don't ask again," she said, mounting slow but sure. "I need to know I can." They rode out past the line of cottonwoods stripped bare for winter into the open plain where the drifts broke and the land stretched flat and wide. He showed her how to brace the stock against her shoulder, how to breathe out slow before squeezing the trigger, not pulling it. Her first shot went low and left. Zeke didn't correct her. He just handed her another cartridge. By the sixth shot, she hit the post dead center. She didn't cheer or smile. She just nodded, reloaded, and did it again. "You've got a good eye," he said, watching her line up another shot. "My uncle taught me to hunt rabbits when I was 12. He said it was the only thing about me worth feeding." Zeke didn't ask about that uncle. He didn't need to. The rifle cracked again, and the post splintered. She lowered the barrel and turned to him. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." "You're not. I still wake up some nights thinking I hear hooves. Thinking they come back to finish what they started." He stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. "They won't. But if they ever tried, they'd find more than they left behind." She looked past him, toward the far horizon where the sky met the snow. "I used to think starting over meant pretending the old life never happened. Now I think it means carrying it different. You don't have to carry it alone." "I know." They rode back slow, the silence between them filled with something weighty but easy. When they reached the barn, Gwenna dismounted and unsaddled without needing help. Her fingers were red from the leather straps, but she didn't flinch. Inside, she laid Waylon on the bed and rubbed his hands with warm cloth. Zeke lit the lamp, the flame flickering low against the glass. She turned toward him, her voice quiet. "When spring comes, I want to plant carrots and onions behind the smokehouse. There's enough sun there." He leaned against the doorframe. "We'll need a fence for the deer. I'll build it. You'll have help." She crossed to him, arms folded under her shawl. "You ever think about marrying again?" His mouth twitched, not in amusement, but in something almost shy. "I think about you." Gwenna reached up, touching his collar. "I don't have much to offer. You have everything I never knew I needed." She didn't answer right away. Just stood there, her breath warm against his throat, her hand resting lightly over his heart. "Then ask me," she said. He did. And she said yes. Just once, soft and sure. Not because she needed saving, and not because she owed him anything, but because they had built something together that felt like it could hold through storm and fire alike. That night, they lay side by side in the same bed for the first time. Waylon curled in the cradle Zeke had built. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Slow this time, gentle, like it meant to bless the roof it landed on. Inside, the fire burned low, and two people who'd known hardship and hunger and loneliness lay warm beneath a single quilt, the shape of their new life taking root beneath it. By mid-April, the thaw had come. Slow, muddy, and full of promise. The last of the ice retreated from the creek banks and the pine tops swept morning melt into the softening earth. Zeke moved the fence line out past the cottonwoods where the soil turned dark and rich. He'd already marked spots for carrots, onions, and beans. Gwenna walked the rows with Waylon on her hip, pressing the toe of her boot into the frost-lifted ground. "You ever think we'll have too much to manage?" she asked, watching a hawk circle high overhead. Zeke tipped his hat back. "If we do, it'll mean we made it." She looked down at the boy, now nearly 7 months old and chewing his fingers with great determination. "I think he'll be stubborn. He's got your jaw. That'll do it." She laughed, the sound quiet and real. Zeke turned from the fence post and leaned against it, arms crossed. "I've been thinking," he said. "We ought to put up a porch before next winter. Roof lines long enough. We could set a bench out, maybe a cot when the nights are warm." "A porch," she repeated, tasting the word. "I like the sound of that. We could string up a line for drying herbs. I know you've been picking winter mint from near the South Bend." "I was going to ask you for twine," she said, brows lifting. "You notice everything." Zeke didn't answer that. He just stepped down from the post and took the boy from her arms. Waylon's head lolled against his shoulder, and he bounced him gently, walking a slow line back toward the barn. Inside, Gwenna knelt by the hearth and stirred the pot of barley and dried venison she'd left simmering. She added a pinch of wild thyme, then stood and wiped her hands on a cloth. When she turned, Zeke was just settling Waylon into his cradle near the stove, his big hands careful as ever. "You know what I've never asked?" she said, watching him. He glanced up. "What's that?" "Why you never left this place. You could have gone anywhere." He straightened, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "I did my share of wandering. Kansas, Utah, Texas. Thought if I kept moving, I'd find something worth staying for. Then I realized I'd been trying to outrun the wrong things." She folded her arms, leaning against the table. "And this place? You stayed because it asked nothing of you?" "I stayed because it gave me room to be still. And then you came." She walked toward him, slow, and took his hand. "You never asked for anything from me, Zeke. Not once. I never had to." She reached up and touched his cheek. "But I want to give it. All of it. Whatever life I've got left, I want it with you." He pulled her in, her hands resting at his chest, and kissed her there in the quiet warmth of the cabin, the barley stew steaming behind them and the baby snoring soft in his cradle. She didn't tremble this time, didn't hesitate. There was no space between them anymore that hadn't already been bridged by trust, tenderness, and the hard-earned weight of survival. They married in early May. Zeke rode into town with the buckboard and returned with a circuit preacher, a roll of linen, and a silver ring he'd traded a rifle for. Gwenna wore a blue skirt she'd sewn from an old grain sack and tied her hair with a strip of lace Mrs. Kettering had given her from her own wedding chest. The ceremony was small and quiet, just the preacher, the widow, and the three of them standing in the field where the creek curved wide and slow. After, Zeke lifted Waylon into his arms and kissed Gwenna's knuckles, then her forehead, and finally her mouth, long and sure. They stayed there a while, the wind soft through the grass, the sun warm on their backs. That summer, they built the porch. Zeke carved the bench from cedar, and Gwenna planted chamomile and sage in a box beside the steps. Waylon crawled through the doorway before August and stood by the fence before the first frost of September. He said his first word, a garbled version of mama, beside a basket of apples, and Gwenna wept as she rocked him, her face pressed to his hair. Zeke taught her to use the plow when the mule grew slow. She taught him how to patch trousers without puckering the seams. They cooked together on Sundays stew, beans, cornbread, and sat out in the cooling dusk when the chores were done. They didn't speak often in the evenings, but when they did, it was about things that mattered. The shape of the boy's hands, the sound of the creek after a storm, the way the land held light just before the sun dipped behind the ridge. One night in October, Gwenna looked out over the field where the barley waved gold and heavy. She leaned against Zeke's side, her head on his shoulder. "I spent so long thinking I wasn't allowed good things," she said. "But this feels like home." Zeke kissed the crown of her head. "It is." The light faded and the lantern on the porch cast a soft halo around them. Waylon slept inside, belly full, curled in the same cradle Zeke had carved that first winter. There were no more storms at their door, no more men chasing shadows, no more questions about where they belonged. They had built something lasting, quiet, strong, and deeply good. A life not fashioned from desperation, but from deliberate, tender choice. They stayed there together through every season that followed. And the land remembered them as good land always does.